The hum of the city outside my window was a familiar comfort as I settled into my chair, the glow of my computer screen lighting up my otherwise dim apartment. Life felt mundane, predictable, even. My days bled into one another. Office work, a polite nod to colleagues I barely knew, and long evenings spent in solitude. Something gnawed at the edges of my mind, a restless yearning for more. Love, companionship. But the women at the office weren't just unavailable. They were, to put it bluntly, unappealing. That night, desperation won. I cracked open a can of soda and dove into the labyrinth of online dating. My fingers moved almost mechanically as I set up a profile, selecting interests and typing out what I hoped sounded charming yet sincere. It was a shot in the dark, but hope flickered nonetheless. The next morning, after a restless sleep, I logged back in. 2 matches. One was a coworker I barely tolerated. Her profile picture made my stomach twist. The other? No photo. Just a name I didn't recognize. Christy. A voice in my head whispered caution, but loneliness drowned it out. I messaged her, inviting her to a local cafe that evening. When her reply came, "Okay," a jolt of excitement coursed through me. My exhaustion from work that day was no match for the nervous anticipation building in my chest. The cafe was warm and inviting, its golden light spilling onto the street outside. I scanned the room nervously, rehearsing a polite apology in case the date was a disaster. And then, she appeared. Her beauty was otherworldly. Silky hair framed a face that seemed untouched by flaws, but it was her eyes that held me captive. Stormy gray with flecks of light, like a tempest frozen in time. She smiled, and for a moment, the noise of the cafe dulled to silence. "Hi," she said, her voice soft and melodic. "You must be David." I stammered a reply, something clumsy and forgettable, but she laughed, and the tension melted away. The evening unfolded seamlessly, each word exchanged weaving an invisible thread between us. When I drove her home, a shabby apartment building that felt unworthy of her presence, we shared our first kiss. It was electric, and I left feeling as though my life had shifted, a void finally filled. Christy became my everything. In just 4 months, I was convinced she was the one. The proposal came naturally, her ecstatic yes solidifying my belief that fate had intervened. Our wedding was small and intimate, a handful of guests seated in the pews. It didn't matter. All I needed was her. As we settled into married life, I felt an unfamiliar joy, a happiness I hadn't thought possible. But then, cracks began to form. It started subtly. The day after our wedding, a coworker who had attended, Kevin, was found dead in his apartment. The news hit me hard. His body described as covered in unexplained lacerations. The office was abuzz with speculation, but no one had answers. That night, I told Christy about Kevin. Her response unsettled me. Sitting upright in bed, she smiled. A smile that didn't reach her eyes, and said, "Don't worry about it. He'll be fine." Her words were nonsensical, yet delivered with such calm certainty that I doubted my own perception. Exhaustion won out, and I drifted into a fitful sleep, plagued by indistinct nightmares. The next morning brought sickness. I woke with a violent cough, my body racked with nausea. Christy cared for me, her touch soothing, her voice a balm. "I love you," she murmured repeatedly, and I clung to her words like a lifeline. But that night shattered everything. Unable to sleep, I reached for her in the dark, seeking comfort. My hand met her skin, cold, clammy, lifeless. Panic surged through me as I turned her over, my breath catching in my throat. Her gray, mesmerizing eyes were gone, replaced by hollow, bloodied sockets. Her skin hung loosely, veined and pale like a corpse unearthed too soon. A scream tore from my throat as I stumbled out of bed, my vision swimming in the oppressive darkness. In the safety of the bathroom, I crumpled to the floor, trembling uncontrollably. Minutes turned to hours, and exhaustion finally dragged me into an uneasy sleep. When I woke, sunlight streamed through the window, and I hesitated before stepping out into the hall. The bedroom was empty. I crept down the hallway, every creak of the floorboards sending a jolt of adrenaline through my veins. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain it would give me away. To what? I wasn't entirely sure. From the kitchen, I heard a clatter of metal. My mind conjured images of Christie's eyeless face, her bloodied sockets staring at nothing, her cold, lifeless skin. Gathering what courage I could muster, I pushed open the kitchen door. There she was, crouched on the floor, hurriedly picking up fallen pans. Her hair hung in messy strands over her face, but she looked normal, radiant, even. "Oh, David," she exclaimed, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "I dropped these. Sorry if I woke you." I stood frozen, my mind struggling to reconcile what I had seen the night before with the sight of my beautiful, living wife. She tilted her head, her expression softening into one of concern. "You don't look well," she said, stepping closer. "What happened?" My throat felt dry. "I thought I was going to be sick last night. Didn't want to wake you." She smiled, relief washing over her features. "You poor thing. Let me make you some breakfast." She kissed me on the cheek before turning back to the stove, humming softly as though nothing had happened. I retreated to the bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. My reflection stared back, pale and drawn, eyes rimmed with dark circles. Had I imagined it? The thought lingered, tempting me with its simplicity. It was easier to believe I'd had a fever-induced nightmare than to confront the alternative. But the nightmares didn't stop. Each night, the same vision played out. Christie's corpse-like body rising unnaturally, her head jerking toward me as though pulled by invisible strings. Her lips, still curved in that beautiful smile, would whisper in a voice colder than death itself, "There's no escape. We'll be together forever." During the day, I began to see glimpses of her. Horrid. In my peripheral vision at the office, behind the cubicles, at the park, slumped against a bench, its lifeless head lolling, always watching me. I stopped sleeping, stopped eating. My colleagues avoided me, whispering behind my back. Even Christie noticed, her brows furrowing in concern as she placed a hand on mine during dinner one evening. "David, you've been acting strange. Is something wrong?" I wanted to tell her, to scream about the horrors I saw in her place, to demand answers. But when I looked into her eyes, those gray, enchanting eyes, my resolve crumbled. Instead, I muttered a feeble excuse about stress from work and excused myself to bed. It all came to a head one evening. I walked through the front door, and there it was. The thing, not Christie, but the grotesque imitation that haunted my dreams. It stood slouched near the kitchen, its eyeless sockets leaking something dark and viscous, its head tilted unnaturally as if waiting for me. I snapped. Before I could think, I lunged at it, shoving its cold, slimy body toward the oven. It thrashed in my grip, emitting a guttural, inhuman wail that made my skin crawl. With every ounce of strength I had, I forced it inside, slamming the door shut and turning the knob. The oven shook violently, its metallic frame groaning under the force of whatever was inside. The wails escalated into ear-piercing screams, filling the house with a sound so horrifying I stumbled backward, covering my ears. I ran outside, collapsing onto the lawn as the screams continued. Neighbors peeked out from their windows, their faces pale with confusion and fear. I didn't care. I stayed there, trembling, until the noise finally stopped. When I ventured back inside, the air was thick with acrid black smoke. The house felt suffocatingly still, an oppressive silence pressing down on me. My stomach churned as I opened the oven door, dread pooling in my gut. Inside was Christie, my Christie, her body charred and unrecognizable. Yet her gray eyes, perfect and untouched, stared up at me, wide with accusation. I dropped to my knees, a strangled cry escaping my throat. I couldn't tear my gaze away from her lifeless form. 15 minutes. 30. I don't know how long I knelt there before the police arrived. They pulled me away, their faces hard with suspicion. In the sterile light of the interrogation room, I wove a shaky story about finding her like that, about how I didn't know what had happened. They believed me, or at least, they pretended to, but I didn't believe myself. I knew what I had done. I had killed her. I had killed my wife. The guilt was a weight I couldn't bear, pressing on my chest until I thought I might suffocate. And yet, the horror wasn't over. I still see her. In the mirror, in the shadows of my hotel room, in the corners of my vision. She's always there, watching me with those accusing gray eyes. I hear her voice in the dead of night, whispering promises of eternity. There's no escape. We'll be together forever. I tried to move on. I even went back to work, desperate for some semblance of normalcy. But when I arrived, the building was cordoned off, a yellow tape fluttering in the breeze. A note on the door read, "Building has been condemned from operations until later notice due to chemical exposure creating hazardous working conditions." My blood ran cold. I sped to my doctor's office, demanding answers. When the test came back, they confirmed my worst fears. The chemical exposure had caused hallucinations, severe migraines, and mental instability. Long-term effects included irreparable brain damage. But none of that mattered, because when I close my eyes, she's there. Then when I open them, she's closer.
Thanks for watching. Please like, share, and subscribe to listen to similar stories in future.